Rebecca Collins thought she had found salvation in Daniel Harper, a devoted missionary in Jerusalem. But behind his holy mask lay a predator, a conman, and a killer whose secrets would not surface until it was far too late. Rebecca Collins had lived in silence for nearly 4 years after her husband's sudden death. The small town in Texas where she grew up became suffocating, every corner reminding her of the life she had lost. Church on Sundays was her only escape, yet even there, she felt the weight of loneliness pressing down. Friends tried to comfort her, but grief is not something that vanishes with kind words. She clung to her faith, praying each night for strength, asking for a sign that life still had meaning. It was during those restless nights that she stumbled upon an online Christian support group, a place where widows, missionaries, and believers from around the world shared testimonies and encouragement. At first, she logged in quietly, only reading the prayers others posted. Then one day, a message stood out, written by a man named Daniel Harper. He introduced himself as an American missionary working in Jerusalem, speaking passionately about the spiritual battles he faced daily. Rebecca found herself reading his posts again and again. Unlike others, his words carried warmth and conviction, as though they were written directly for her. Slowly, she began replying, offering small words of encouragement, until their exchanges grew longer and more personal. Daniel spoke of God's plan, of finding strength in suffering, and of love that never dies. For Rebecca, it was like a door opening in a room she thought was locked forever. Her heart, once frozen, began to thaw. She started believing that perhaps this was the answer to her prayers, that maybe God had sent her this man as a beacon of hope. In Daniel, she didn't just see a stranger across the sea. She saw the possibility of a second chance at love and life. Daniel Harper's life, at least the one he described, seemed almost larger than life. He spoke of narrow stone streets in Jerusalem, of ancient churches where candles flickered against walls marked by centuries of prayers. He sent photographs of himself standing near holy sites, dressed modestly, holding a worn Bible in his hand. To Rebecca, these images were proof of his devotion, evidence that he was a man of purpose. His messages carried urgency, but also tenderness. He wrote about feeding orphans, about distributing Bibles in hidden corners, and about the risks of living so far from home without steady financial support. Rebecca, who had always admired missionaries, felt drawn into his world. She imagined walking beside him through sacred markets, sharing the burden of his calling. The more he shared, the more she trusted. His words painted him as both strong and vulnerable, a man who needed encouragement and partnership. He told her he was lonely, often misunderstood, and in need of someone who believed in his mission. Slowly, Rebecca began sending small amounts of money. At first, it was framed as a gesture of faith, helping him buy supplies for children. Later, the requests became larger, cloaked in the language of sacrifice and service. She convinced herself it was not charity, but investment in something holy. Each transfer deepened her sense of connection, binding her to him not just spiritually, but financially. Daniel praised her generosity, reminding her that God rewards cheerful givers. For Rebecca, the money was not a loss but a seed planted in fertile ground, a step toward a shared future. By then, she was no longer a grieving widow seeking comfort. She was a believer convinced she had found her calling through a man who seemed chosen by God. 2 years passed in a blur of messages, phone calls, and promises. Rebecca's trust in Daniel grew so deep that she no longer questioned the sacrifices she made. Her late husband's property, a modest piece of land that had been their security, began to feel like an anchor tying her to a past she wanted to escape. Daniel spoke often about building a future together, a home where faith and love would guide every step. His words planted visions in her mind, walking through Jerusalem's ancient streets hand in hand, praying together at holy sites, living as partners in a sacred mission. Slowly, she made the decision to sell the property. Friends warned her about rushing, but Rebecca silenced their doubts with scripture and determination. Every dollar from the sale was redirected toward her plan to join Daniel. She told herself it was not abandonment of her past, but a leap into her destiny. In early 2019, Rebecca stood at the airport clutching a ticket to Israel, her heart pounding with both fear and anticipation. She had packed light, believing that her real possessions awaited her in the Holy Land. The thought of finally meeting Daniel filled her with nervous excitement. As the plane lifted into the sky, she whispered a prayer, convinced that God was guiding her steps. Hours later, the city of Jerusalem stretched beneath her, sunlit and ancient, promising everything she longed for. Yet the moment she stepped into that unfamiliar world, she sensed undercurrents she couldn't quite explain. Daniel was waiting, but not with the openness she expected. There was something unreadable in his eyes, something carefully hidden. What Rebecca didn't know was that her leap of faith was leading her into a web already spun long before her arrival. Rebecca's first days in Jerusalem were filled with awe and unease. The city was alive with history, every street echoing with centuries of faith, but her attention was fixed on Daniel. He welcomed her warmly, yet his life seemed less solitary than he had described. He was often distracted, slipping away for errands that lasted hours, and speaking vaguely when she asked questions. One afternoon, while visiting a community center Daniel claimed to support, Rebecca met a young woman named Sarah Novak. Sarah was friendly, soft-spoken, and introduced herself as Daniel's fiancée. The word struck Rebecca like a blow. At first, she thought she had misheard, but as the conversation deepened, the truth surfaced. Sarah, too, had met Daniel online. Sarah, too, had sent him money. And Sarah, too, believed she was building a future with him. The two women compared details, each revelation tightening the knot of betrayal in Rebecca's chest. Their stories mirrored one another. Same promises, same scriptures, even the same photographs sent as proof of devotion. It was clear they were both caught in something larger than a misunderstanding. Yet when confronted, Daniel brushed it off with practiced ease. He insisted Sarah was a supporter, a friend who had misinterpreted his intentions. His voice carried authority, and his reassurances were wrapped in scripture, making doubt feel like sin. Rebecca wanted to believe him, clinging to the image of the man she had crossed oceans to join. Sarah, though shaken, also hesitated to let go. Both women were trapped between suspicion and hope, unwilling to fully admit they had been deceived. What neither realized was that their hesitation was exactly what Daniel relied upon. His power was not just in lies, but in their desperate need to believe those lies. Time in Jerusalem began to take on a darker shape for Rebecca. What once felt like a holy journey now carried an undercurrent of fear and confusion. She noticed that her bank account showed withdrawals she hadn't made, amounts small at first, but soon impossible to ignore. When she asked Daniel, he explained that he was helping manage her funds for safety, since foreigners were often targeted for theft. His calm tone and confident manner left her hesitant to challenge him. She wanted to trust him, yet the unease grew stronger with every missing dollar. Letters from her family back in Texas also began to disappear. Rebecca had asked her sister to write often, but weeks passed without word. Daniel told her the mail was unreliable, that it sometimes got lost. Only later did she realize he was intercepting the envelopes, keeping her connection to home weak and distant. Sarah faced similar troubles. Her savings dwindled rapidly, with transfers Daniel encouraged as investments in God's kingdom. Together, the women began to see patterns that could no longer be explained away as coincidence. Still, Daniel's presence was magnetic. He alternated between tenderness and authority, convincing them their doubts were temptations meant to shake their faith. Rebecca started losing sleep, haunted by questions she couldn't silence. Why did Daniel always insist on handling their documents? Why were they discouraged from speaking to neighbors alone? Why did his stories about his past shift slightly each time he told them? Sarah whispered her fears late at night, but they never dared confront him directly. They were caught in a trap made not only of lies, but of their own reluctance to face them. Daniel's hold was tightening, and both women were slowly slipping deeper into his carefully constructed prison. By late 2020, the fragile balance shattered. Sarah, who had grown increasingly restless, began asking sharper questions. She wanted to see receipts for the money she sent, records of the charities Daniel claimed to support, and contact with the communities he described. Each time she pressed, Daniel's charm faded into irritation. He told her she was questioning God's work. That doubt was poison. Rebecca watched the tension rise between them, torn between sympathy for Sarah and fear of losing Daniel's approval. Then, one evening, Sarah was simply gone. Daniel explained she had decided to return to Poland suddenly, overwhelmed by the weight of missionary life. His words were smooth, yet his eyes carried a flicker of impatience, as if the matter was already closed. At first, Rebecca forced herself to accept the explanation. She wanted to believe Sarah had boarded a plane and left quietly. Yet neighbors in the quarter whispered unsettling things. Some claimed they had heard shouting from Daniel's apartment days earlier. Others said they saw Sarah crying in the street, clutching her bag, before disappearing. The rumors gnawed at Rebecca's mind, but whenever she tried to ask, Daniel silenced her with scripture and reassurances. Weeks passed without a single message from Sarah. No calls, no emails, no trace of her departure. Rebecca's unease grew into dread. She replayed their final conversation, Sarah's whispered fears, her insistence that something was wrong. Every memory now felt like a warning Rebecca had ignored. And yet, paralyzed by loyalty and hope, she stayed. She convinced herself Sarah might still resurface, perhaps embarrassed, perhaps unwilling to face the truth. Deep inside, though, Rebecca sensed a darker reality. Sarah had not simply vanished. She had been erased, and Daniel was the only one who knew how. In early 2022, the quiet hills outside Jerusalem became the scene of a grim discovery. A group of hikers, wandering near an abandoned monastery, noticed disturbed soil beneath a cluster of olive trees. At first, they thought it was an animal's burrow, but as they dug curiously, fragments of fabric appeared. Moments later, the outline of human remains came into view. Shock rippled through the group, and authorities were called immediately. The investigation revealed the body of a woman buried in a shallow grave. Forensic work was slow, but dental records confirmed what Rebecca had silently feared. It was Sarah Novak. News of the discovery spread quickly through the city. Sarah's disappearance, once explained away as a private choice, was now tied to something far more sinister. Neighbors who had dismissed their suspicions began to speak openly. Several admitted they had seen Daniel and Sarah arguing in the days before she vanished. Others described strange noises from Daniel's apartment, followed by silence. Every detail painted a picture of conflict hidden behind religious devotion. Rebecca was devastated. She could no longer cling to the fragile hope that Sarah had returned to Poland. Instead, she was confronted with the horrifying reality that Sarah had been murdered. And while no one spoke his name directly, the suspicion that Daniel was involved grew heavier with each passing day. Rebecca replayed her memories of him, the shifting stories, the controlling behavior, the sudden anger. All of it now looked different in the shadow of Sarah's grave. The police began connecting threads, financial transactions, testimonies, movements on the night Sarah vanished. The man Rebecca had trusted, the man she had crossed oceans to follow, was no longer just a questionable partner. He was now a suspect in a killing that shocked the community. Rebecca's world collapsed when police arrived to question her. The officers treated her not as a victim, but as someone who might hold crucial information. They asked about her finances, her movements, and Daniel's behavior. With every question, the walls she had built around herself cracked. She realized she had given Daniel access to everything. Her savings, her documents, even her letters. What she thought was love had been control. Shame pressed heavily on her, yet she knew silence would only make her complicit. For the first time, Rebecca spoke openly about her doubts, confessing the unexplained withdrawals, the intercepted mail, and the way Daniel manipulated both her and Sarah. Her words became evidence, but they also reopened wounds she had tried to bury. Guilt consumed her. She had ignored Sarah's warnings, dismissing them as jealousy or fear. Now Sarah was dead, and Rebecca felt partly responsible. Nights were sleepless, haunted by Sarah's face and the whispers of neighbors she had once dismissed. She could no longer deny the truth. Daniel had trapped her, and she had allowed herself to be trapped. Police encouraged her to stay close, promising protection, but Rebecca felt exposed in ways she never imagined. The man she trusted with her future was now a shadow of menace in every corner of her mind. She feared retaliation, feared being silenced like Sarah. Yet she also knew her testimony might be the only chance to bring justice. For Rebecca, the decision was clear. She would cooperate fully, even if it meant reliving every betrayal. Her faith, once twisted into a chain, began to feel like a lifeline again. By speaking out, she was no longer just a widow searching for love. She was a survivor determined to reveal the predator hiding behind Scripture. The investigation into Daniel Harper's life revealed a history far darker than Rebecca could have imagined. Police uncovered that he was not a missionary at all, but a seasoned con man who had used religion as a disguise for years. Records linked him to scams across Europe, Asia, and North America. In every case, his victims shared a pattern: women who were vulnerable, widowed, or isolated, drawn in by his charm and spiritual language. He created fake charities, complete with convincing websites and photographs of staged mission work. Money poured into accounts under different names, all traced back to him. Forensic accountants followed the trail of Sarah's final bank transfer, discovering it had gone directly into one of Daniel's shell accounts. Combined with Rebecca's testimony, this became damning evidence. Investigators also found forged identification cards, passports, and handwritten notes detailing how he planned to control and exploit his victims. It was not chance, but strategy, carefully orchestrated manipulation wrapped in religious imagery. Neighbors recalled hearing violent arguments in the days before Sarah disappeared, and some even admitted they feared Daniel but stayed silent. Now their statements painted a picture of a man living a double life, publicly devout, privately ruthless. The police built a timeline showing Daniel's movements, his financial exploitation, and his link to Sarah's death. For Rebecca, the revelations were crushing. The man she thought God had sent her was instead a predator who preyed on faith itself. Yet her courage in coming forward gave investigators the foundation they needed to build the case. The mask Daniel wore for so long had finally slipped, exposing not a missionary but a criminal who used love, Scripture, and hope as weapons against the very people who trusted him most. In 2023, the case reached its final chapter when Israeli police held a press conference to reveal the truth. Reporters crowded the room, cameras flashing as officials detailed how Daniel Harper had orchestrated years of fraud, coercion, and manipulation. They confirmed what many had feared. He was responsible not only for financial crimes, but also for Sarah Novak's death. The evidence, gathered over months of painstaking investigation, was overwhelming. Bank records, forged documents, witness testimonies, and forensic analysis left little doubt. Daniel was arrested, tried, and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was filled with victims from different countries, women who finally saw justice after years of silence. Rebecca sat among them, her face pale but resolute. She listened as the judge described Daniel's crimes, the exploitation of faith, and the destruction left in his wake. For Rebecca, it was a strange mix of grief and relief. She mourned the years she had lost, the trust that had been shattered, and Sarah's life cut short. Yet she also felt a weight lift, knowing the truth was finally exposed. She was no longer a captive of Daniel's lies, but a survivor who had helped uncover them. Returning to Texas was not easy. Rebecca faced questions from her community, whispers of judgment, and her own battle with shame. Still, she began rebuilding quietly, speaking to church groups about the dangers of blind trust and the predators who exploit faith. Her story became a warning, but also a testament to resilience. For years after stepping onto a plane believing she was chasing love, she returned home changed. Daniel Harper's deception had nearly destroyed her, but it had not silenced her. Instead, it revealed her strength in the face of betrayal.